Marcus thought the midnight silence made him invisible. He stood outside Cindy Brown's apartment door, gripping the wooden baseball bat so tightly his knuckles had gone pale, convincing himself that this was justice, that she deserved this, that a woman who had the audacity to walk away from him needed to be reminded of exactly who he was. He pulled back and swung. The door didn't just open, it exploded. A deafening crack of splintering wood, a shower of shattered glass catching the pale moonlight, and Marcus stepped through the wreckage like a man who owned the night. He found Cindy exactly where his worst instincts told him she'd be pressed flat against the far wall, her silky pajamas trembling, her natural curls framing a face locked in pure, paralyzed terror. Her wide eyes and raised hands, pleading without a single word, fed something ugly and satisfied deep inside him. He raised the bat and opened his mouth to speak, but the words died before they were born. Because from the darkness of the armchair, the one sitting perfectly still in the center of the room, the one Marcus hadn't even registered, came a sound that froze every drop of blood in his body. The slow, deliberate clink of ice, settling in a crystal glass of whiskey. Marcus. The voice was quiet. Polite, even. The kind of calm that doesn't need to raise itself because every room it enters already belongs to it. I was wondering when you would stop running. Bayjum sat exactly as he had for the past 2 hours. Legs crossed, dark blue suit immaculate, the top button of his white dress shirt, the only concession to the lateness of the hour. He didn't look at the shattered door. He didn't look at the bat. He looked only at Marcus, with the cold, measuring patience of a man who had already decided how this night would end long before Marcus had ever left his house. Marcus had spent 6 months hiding from this man. 6 months of burner phones and back alleys and borrowed couches and desperate prayers that Bayjum's reach had limits. He now understood, with shattering clarity, that it did not. The predator who had smashed through that door expecting to terrorize a defenseless woman had just walked, bat in hand and chest puffed out, directly into the one room in the entire city where he was the least dangerous person present. The trap hadn't been set tonight. It had been set months ago and Marcus had just finished springing it himself. What happens next will change everything for Cindy Brown, and it will end everything for Marcus. Subscribe to see how this unfolds and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is reaching. The glass hadn't finished falling before Marcus was already inside. He stepped through the wreckage of the door with the slow, deliberate swagger of a man who had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, each rehearsal ending the same way, with Cindy small and shaking and sorry. The broken wood crunched beneath his boots. Shards of glass caught the pale moonlight pouring in through the open doorway behind him, scattering tiny silver explosions across the hardwood floor. He didn't look down. He didn't need to. The destruction at his feet was the point. The noise was the point. He wanted her to hear it. He wanted her to feel, in the deep animal part of her brain, what it meant that he was here. He found her immediately. Cindy had made it as far as the far wall which, in the cramped geography of her living room, wasn't far at all. She was pressed flat against it, her shoulder blades flush against the plaster, as if she were trying to push herself through to the other side and disappear into the building's bones. Her silky pajama top had one button askew from where she'd scrambled out of bed at the first sound of footsteps on the landing. Her natural curls, loose around her face the way she always wore them to sleep, framed an expression that Marcus felt, in the ugliest corner of himself, like a reward. Her hands were raised to either side of her shoulders, palms out, fingers spread a gesture that was half plea and half instinct, the body's last, desperate argument against what the mind already knew was coming. Her eyes were enormous. They were fixed on him, and they were terrified. "There she is," Marcus said. His voice was low and warm in the way that a lit fuse is warm, carrying heat that only means one thing. He rolled the bat slowly in his right hand, a lazy rotation of his wrist, and took one step forward over the threshold. The moonlight came with him, painting the left side of his face in cold white light. His gray t-shirt pulled tight across his chest and shoulders with every breath. His jaw was set. His eyes were flat. 6 months of humiliation, of sleeping on other people's floors, of jumping at shadows and flinching at unfamiliar cars parked on his block, 6 months of running had curdled inside him into something that no longer resembled a human emotion. It had become fuel. And Cindy Brown, standing against that wall in her pretty silk pajamas in her pretty little apartment with her pretty little books stacked in their pretty little piles on the floor, was the outlet he had chosen for all of it. "You changed the locks," he said, glancing back at the ruin of the door with a slow shake of his head, almost amused. "That was optimistic of you." Cindy's mouth moved. Nothing came out. "I just want to talk," he said, and smiled, and the smile was the worst thing in the room. That's all this is. Just a conversation between two people who know each other. Come on now. Don't make this ugly. He took another step. Glass crunched. Somewhere outside, a car passed on the street below, its headlights briefly sweeping the curtains before sliding away, indifferent, taking the last evidence of the normal world with it. Cindy's breath came in short, shallow pulls. Her hands trembled. Marcus raised the bat and pointed it at her. Not swinging, not yet just pointing, the way a man might point a finger to make a point at a dinner table. 6 months, he said, his voice dropping. "You think you could just what? Move on? Start over? Like I don't exist?" He stepped over a stack of paperbacks that had toppled from the side table when the door blew in, not bothering to go around them. Pages crumpled under his boot. "I made you. You understand that? Everything you think you are, I made." He was close now, close enough that she could smell the bourbon on him, not Bay Jum's careful, measured whiskey, but the cheap, desperate kind that men drink when they're trying to feel large. Close enough that she could see the precise moment his expression shifted from performed menace into something rawer and more honest, and therefore more frightening. Close enough that neither of them, in that terrible and focused moment, had registered the armchair. Clink. The sound was so small, so precise, so completely wrong for the room that it took a full second for Marcus's brain to process it as real. The unhurried settling of ice against the inside of a crystal glass, the sound of someone comfortable, someone patient, someone who had been sitting in the dark of this apartment for quite some time and had no particular objection to sitting in it a while longer. Marcus went still. Not the stillness of a man pausing. The stillness of a man whose nervous system has just received a signal it doesn't know how to interpret and has frozen all non-essential processes while it tries to work out what that signal means. He turned his head. Bay Jum did not look up immediately. He finished the small, unhurried gesture of settling the crystal glass against the arm of the chair, Cindy's chair, the dark brown one she'd found at a second-hand shop and spent a weekend reupholstering, now occupied by a man in a suit that cost more than 3 months of her rent. His legs were crossed at the knee. His dark blue jacket was entirely unwrinkled. His white dress shirt was open at the collar by exactly 1 button, the only acknowledgement that it was past midnight, and his dark hair was neat above a face that was, in its stillness, almost sculptural, handsome in the precise, unhelpful way that a blade is handsome. He looked up at Marcus with eyes that held no anger, no surprise, and no fear whatsoever. They held only attention. The focused, unhurried attention of a man examining something he has already categorized, already decided upon, and is now simply watching perform its last remaining movements. "Marcus," Bay Jum said. His English was clean and unhurried, carrying the faintest architecture of an accent beneath it like rebar inside concrete present, structural, invisible until you looked for it. "Please don't break anything else. It's rude to destroy another person's home." The bat dropped 2 inches in Marcus's grip, without him deciding to drop it, because he knew that voice. He knew it the way you know the sound of a door closing in a room you've been locked inside, not because it's loud, but because of what it means. He knew it from a basement in Koreatown 14 months ago, when he'd sat across a lacquered table from this man and signed his name to a debt that felt, at the time, like salvation. He knew it from 3 subsequent phone calls that had come from numbers that didn't exist, at hours that suggested Bay Jum's operation did not observe conventional business schedules. He knew it from the stories, the ones that circulated in the specific, hushed register that people use when they're describing something they're afraid to speak at full volume. Bay Jum, head of the Jum Syndicate's Western operations. A man so precise in his methods that his name appearing in connection with a problem was considered, by most people with any sense, to be the end of the problem's story rather than the beginning. The same man that Marcus had spent the last 6 months doing everything in his power to avoid, sitting in Cindy Brown's armchair, in the dark, with a whiskey. "Sit down, Marcus," Bajum said pleasantly, and nodded toward the sofa. Marcus did not sit down. 3 seconds passed in which no one in the room breathed at a normal rate. Then Marcus's jaw tightened, and something behind his eyes made a decision that his better judgment, what remained of it, immediately began screaming against. He knew something about Bajum being here that Cindy didn't know. He knew something that changed the geometry of this room in a way that made his blood run cold even through the bourbon and the adrenaline and the 6 months of accumulated, weaponized rage. He knew why Bajum was here. He just didn't know that he knew not consciously. Not yet. But somewhere beneath the surface of his thoughts, a door was beginning to open onto a memory he had spent months burying under layers of bravado and blame. 14 months ago, Marcus had made 2 decisions in the same week. The first was borrowing money from the Jum Syndicate, a substantial sum, enough to cover debts that had their own debts, enough to keep certain people from asking certain questions in certain tones of voice. The second decision, the one that had followed the first by exactly 4 days, was the one he had never told anyone. The one he had never written down, never spoken aloud, never fully allowed himself to think about in complete sentences, because to think about it in complete sentences was to acknowledge what he had done. He had stolen from them. Not cash. Cash could be traced. Cash could be recovered. Cash left footprints. What Marcus had taken was a flash drive, small enough to close your fist around. Black plastic casing, no label, indistinguishable from the kind of thing you'd buy a 3-pack of at any electronics store. He'd lifted it from the jacket pocket of a syndicate courier named Jin Ho, who had made the mistake of leaving that jacket on the back of a chair during a card game Marcus had no business attending. Jin Ho had been distracted. The hand had been good. The jacket had been very close. Marcus hadn't known, in that exact moment, what was on the drive. He'd found out later, by which point the knowing had become its own kind of terror. The drive contained an encrypted operational ledger. Accounts, names, numbers. The kind of document that a syndicate used to track the movement of funds across 3 time zones and didn't, under any circumstances, allow to circulate outside of controlled hands. The kind of document that, if it surfaced in the wrong place, could bring a level of institutional attention down on the Jum Syndicate that no amount of legal firepower could easily redirect. It was, in short, the most dangerous thing Marcus had ever held in his hands. He couldn't sell it, not without revealing who he was and what he'd done. He couldn't destroy it, because the moment the syndicate discovered it was gone, having nothing to offer as leverage would leave him with nothing to bargain with. He couldn't keep it on his person, too risky, too exposed. He needed a hiding place. He needed somewhere the syndicate would have no reason to look. Somewhere outside the orbit of anyone connected to him. He'd thought of Cindy. It had taken him 20 minutes, on an afternoon 6 weeks before she'd finally found the courage to leave him, while she was in the shower and he was restless in her living room. He'd pulled a thick paperback from the middle of the tallest stack, a dense literary novel, the kind Cindy collected but rarely read straight through, the kind that could sit undisturbed for a year. He'd opened it to page 200, pressed the flash drive flat against the spine in the hollow between 2 signatures of pages, and closed it, replaced it in the middle of the stack, left it there like a splinter beneath skin, invisible, embedded, waiting. He'd told himself it was temporary. He'd told himself he'd retrieve it before it mattered. Then she'd left him. Then the debt had mounted. Then the months had passed, and every time he'd thought about going back for it, something had stopped him, the fear of being seen near the syndicate's property, the paranoid certainty that the apartment was being watched, the stubborn, bourbon-soaked conviction that if he just laid low long enough, the whole situation would somehow resolve itself without requiring him to face it. The drive was still in that book, and Bajum was sitting 15 feet away from it, in the dark, with all the patience of a man who had simply decided to wait until it came to him. Marcus didn't know, not with certainty, whether Bajum had already found it. He didn't know if the Mafia boss had come here to retrieve the drive or to retrieve him. He didn't know which of those 2 outcomes was worse. What he did know, in the terrible clarity that arrives when the mind has run out of comfortable lies to tell itself, was that there was no version of this night that ended well for Marcus, unless he was the one holding the bat when it was over. He tightened his grip on the handle. "How'd you find me?" Marcus said. He kept his voice even. He was proud, in a distant, clinical way, of how even he kept it. Beijum tilted his head slightly. "I didn't find you," he said. "You found me." He let that sit for a moment, then added, with something that was almost gentle, "Though I knew you would eventually. Desperate men always return to the last place they felt safe." He glanced, briefly, at Cindy, who had not moved from the wall, who was barely breathing, whose eyes were moving between the two men like someone watching a conversation in a language they don't speak, but whose tone they understand completely. "I apologize for the intrusion, Miss Brown. This shouldn't take long." "Don't talk to her," Marcus said sharply. "I'll speak to whoever I choose," Beijum said, and the gentleness in his voice did not change by a single degree, which somehow made it worse. "That is one of the small pleasures of my position." He lifted the glass, considered it, set it back down without drinking. "Sit down, Marcus. I'm good standing." "You're good standing," Beijum repeated, as if tasting the sentence. "All right." He reached into the inside breast pocket of his jacket, a motion so unhurried and deliberate that Marcus's grip on the bat pulsed with the effort of not reacting, and produced a small, folded piece of paper. He opened it with 2 fingers, held it at reading distance, and began to speak. "Initial principal, $420,000, negotiated March of last year. Interest accrued over 14 months at the agreed rate, $112,400. Late penalty, which I waived twice out of, I'll be honest. An excess of goodwill reinstated as of 30 days ago, $68,000. He folded the paper back along its crease, precisely, and returned it to his pocket. "There is also the matter of the operational materials taken from Jinho Pak during a card game at the Clover Room. We don't place a monetary value on those. They are in a different category." The number sat in the middle of the room like something physical, like another piece of furniture, heavy and unmovable. $600,000. And change, and the drive. Marcus felt the bourbon doing nothing useful. "I don't have that," he said. "I know," Beijum said simply. "That's not why I'm here tonight." "Then why are you here?" Beijum looked at the stacks of books on the floor. Several had toppled when the door came in. Paperbacks splayed open across the hardwood, their pages bent, their spines cracked. He looked at them with the particular attention of a man performing a calculation. "I think you know," he said. Marcus's eyes went to the books before he could stop them. A fraction of a second, involuntary, unstoppable, the body betraying the mind before the mind could intervene. His gaze touched the tallest remaining stack in the corner near the sofa, and snapped back to Beijum's face. It was enough. Beijum's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did a small, quiet settling, the look of a man confirming an answer he already had. "There it is," Beijum said softly. "I don't know what you're talking about." Marcus's voice had lost some of its evenness. "Of course." Beijum uncrossed his legs and crossed them the other way, resettling in the chair with the unhurried ease of a man who had nowhere to be and no anxiety about getting there. "Marcus, I want you to think very carefully about the next thing you do. Not about what you want to do. About what the outcome of that action will look like in 20 minutes, and tomorrow morning, and for however long after that you have the opportunity to consider it." He paused. "You came here tonight with a specific intention toward Miss Brown. That intention is no longer relevant to the evening's proceedings. The bat in your hand is decorative at this point. What I am asking you, politely, to do is to put it down. Tell me which book, and then sit down on that sofa so we can discuss the terms of what happens next." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture. The refrigerator hummed somewhere in the kitchen. Cindy's breathing had steadied barely, fractionally, but the quality of her fear had shifted. The way fear shifts when it stops being about one danger and becomes about the specific, suspended uncertainty of 2 dangers in the same room. Marcus looked at Beijum. He looked at the books. He looked at the door he'd come through at the broken frame, the hanging splinters, the open rectangle of night beyond it. His jaw worked. "You know what your problem is?" he said, and his voice had gone somewhere past fear into the strange, flat country on the other side of it. You think because you've got money and men and a nice suit, you can just walk into somebody's situation and rearrange it. Like you own the whole board. He raised the bat slowly until it was level with his shoulder. Nobody owns me. Not you. Not your syndicate. Not anybody. Bejum looked at the bat. He looked at Marcus's face. His expression held the same quality it had held since the beginning of the conversation, the quality of a man who has seen this precise moment many times before and has very little left to learn from watching it. "Marcus," he said quietly. "Shut up," Marcus said, and he was moving. He covered the distance between himself and the armchair in 3 long strides, the bat coming back and then forward in a wide, furious arc aimed at the calm, unhurried, infuriating center of Bejum's composure, at the crystal glass, at the crossed legs, at the folded pocket square, at every unbothered, untouchable, immovable quality of the man sitting there like the room belonged to him. Bejum did not flinch. He did not move. He did not spill a drop. What he did, in the last fraction of a second before the bat arrived, was look slightly to his left and nod. The bedroom door opened without a sound. The kitchen doorway, which Marcus had walked past without looking at, suddenly contained 2 shapes that had not been there before had been there the whole time. Marcus now understood, utterly still in the dark, waiting with the patience of men for whom waiting is a professional skill. A third figure materialized from behind the heavy curtain along the far wall. They moved the way water moves downhill, without urgency, without hesitation, simply in the direction that physics requires, covering the room before Marcus's follow-through had finished. The bat never connected. The men didn't rush. That was the part that would stay with Cindy longest afterward, not the speed of it, but the absence of speed. The way they moved was so controlled, so completely without wasted motion, that the whole thing had the quality of something rehearsed rather than something happening, as if the room itself had been choreographed before anyone arrived, and everyone present was simply hitting their marks. The one from the bedroom came through the door at the precise angle that cut off Marcus's left side. The 2 from the kitchen doorway split without a word exchanged between them, one going wide to circle the sofa, one coming straight up the center. The figure from behind the curtain materialized at Marcus's back before his swing had even reached its apex, the heavy drape swaying once, gently, in that figure's wake, and then going still, as if nothing behind it had ever existed. 4 seconds, perhaps 5, the kind of interval that, in a normal life, you'd use to cross a room for a glass of water. Marcus's wrist was caught at the peak of the arc, one hand on the bat, one on his forearm, and the redirection was applied with the kind of efficiency that speaks not of strength, but of knowledge. The knowledge of angles, of leverage, of exactly how much force a joint can absorb before the body's instinct is to follow rather than resist. Marcus's feet left the hardwood. His center of gravity made a decision without consulting him, and then he was going down, and the bat was going elsewhere, and the landing when it came was controlled in the way that a surgeon's cut is controlled, precise, deliberate, the minimum necessary. He ended up on his knees, not thrown there, not slammed, simply placed, with the same unhurried authority with which Bejum had been conducting the entire evening, as if even Marcus's humiliation was being managed to a standard. One arm was behind him at an angle that foreclosed every practical option. A hand rested on his shoulder, not gripping, just present, communicating through its stillness a set of facts about the current situation that required no translation. Marcus's chest heaved. His face, which had cycled through fury and bravado and desperation over the course of the last several minutes, had arrived at something it didn't have the musculature for, a kind of naked, undefended shock. The expression of a man who has spent months constructing an elaborate internal story about his own power, and has just watched it disassembled in under 5 seconds by men who didn't even seem to find it interesting. The bat lay across the room near the overturned stack of books. It had come to rest against the spine of a thick hardcover, tilted at an angle, as if leaning there for support. Bejum looked at it briefly. Then he looked at the crystal glass in his hand, which had remained throughout all of it entirely level, entirely undisturbed, the whiskey sitting at precisely the same angle it had occupied since before Marcus came through the door. He took a slow, considered sip, held it a moment, set the glass down on Cindy's side table with a sound like a period at the end of a very long sentence. Click. He stood. The jacket adjustment was minimal, one small tug at the left lapel, one at the right, a smoothing motion across the front that addressed a wrinkle of his own private reckoning rather than anything visible to anyone else. He buttoned the single open button of his shirt collar. He did all of this without looking at Marcus, the way a person might tidy up after a meal before addressing the table, a sequence of small, habitual acts that communicated, without commentary, that what had just happened had not disturbed the basic order of his day. Then he looked down. Marcus was breathing in short, effortful pulls. The hardwood was unforgiving under his knees. A paperback cover dug into the bone of his right kneecap, some novel Cindy had never gotten around to finishing, its corner probably leaving a small, precise bruise that he would carry for days. His eyes were up, fixed on Bejum's face, and in them was the thing that no amount of bourbon or bravado or rehearsed menace had been able to fully hide, the thing that had always been at the center of Marcus. Underneath the muscle and the rage and the performed dominance, a smallness, a desperate, cornered smallness that lashed out at everything within reach precisely because it knew, on some honest and unspoken level, that it had nothing real to stand on. Bejum regarded him with the same quality of attention he had held all evening. Not contempt. Contempt would have required Marcus to matter to him in a way that he didn't. Not satisfaction. There was no pleasure in Bejum's face. No relish, no warmth in either direction. Only the focused, administrative calm of a man who has resolved a problem and is now preparing to file it away. "Marcus," he said. His voice, as always, was quiet. The room gave it to everyone in it without effort, the way a quiet room always amplifies the things spoken most softly. "I want you to understand something clearly, because I think clarity has been in short supply in your life for some time now, and I believe genuinely that a lack of it is what brought you here tonight." He took one step closer, not threatening, geometrically precise. "You came to this apartment because you believed that fear was a resource you still possessed, that if you could make this woman afraid enough," he did not gesture toward Cindy, but the sentence acknowledged her, "you could reclaim some version of the control you feel you've lost. That is a story you've been telling yourself." He paused. "It was never true, but tonight is the last night it will be available to you as a comfort." Marcus's mouth opened. A sound came out that wasn't quite a word, the beginning of something defiant, some final reflex of the persona he'd been performing for years, and then it stopped. Because Bejum's eyes didn't change when the sound came. They didn't sharpen or narrow or react in any way that suggested the defiance registered as a meaningful variable. And that complete, structural indifference to whatever Marcus might still attempt to project was more silencing than any threat could have been. "Your debt," Bejum continued, in the same tone a doctor might use to deliver a prognosis that is unfortunate but not unexpected, "is not a number that can be renegotiated. It is not a number that can be avoided, deferred, or relocated. You have tried all three of those approaches over the past 14 months, and I think you understand by now that none of them have the effect you hoped for." He tilted his head slightly. "What you perhaps don't know, what I'd like you to understand before you leave here tonight, is that this has never been about the money." He let that sit. "The money," he said, "is a formality, a unit of measurement. What the debt actually represents is a decision you made, a decision to take something that wasn't yours, from people who notice when things go missing, and to believe that the gap between your actions and their consequences was larger than it was." He reached into his inside breast pocket and removed the folded paper again. He didn't open it this time. He simply held it, then set it on the side table beside the empty glass. "The ledger on that drive contains the names of 17 people whose safety depends on that information remaining where it belongs. Not as a matter of finance, as a matter of survival." His voice, if possible, became quieter. "You used those 17 people as a hiding place for your own comfort. That is what tonight is actually about." Marcus looked at the folded paper. He looked at the glass beside it. He looked up at Bejum, and whatever remained of the performance fell away entirely, and what was left was just a man on a floor, in pain, having run out of road. "What happens now?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "Now," Bejum said, "you go with my associates. Where you go and what happens when you arrive there is a conversation between you and the people you owe. I'll be honest with you, the conversation will be difficult. But you have, in the past, demonstrated a capacity for survival when properly motivated." The faintest pause. "I suggest you locate that capacity quickly." He stepped back. One clean, unhurried step. He looked at the man holding Marcus's arm and gave the smallest possible nod, barely a tilt of the chin, the kind of signal legible only to people who have been trained to read it. The men moved. They brought him up from the floor with the same efficiency with which they'd put him there, not cruelly, not gently, simply functionally, the way you'd lift and move any object that needed to be somewhere else. Marcus found his feet under him without quite deciding to stand. His arm was released from behind his back and repositioned, a hand at his arm and a hand at his shoulder, and the whole arrangement began moving toward the door in a direction that was not optional. He looked back once. His eyes found Cindy found her against the wall where she'd been the entire time, her hands now at her sides, her face no longer frozen in the pure animal terror of the first minutes, but holding something harder to name. Something that was not yet relief, not yet understanding, not yet anything with a clean label, but that was in the process of becoming all three. Her eyes met his. Marcus opened his mouth. The man on his left applied a small, informative pressure to his elbow. Marcus closed his mouth. He looked at Cindy for one more second, this woman he had spent years diminishing, terrorizing, reducing to a wall-pressed shadow of herself, who was standing in her living room at midnight, surrounded by the wreckage of his decisions and watching him be walked out of her life by men in dark clothing, and whatever he saw in her face in that moment, whatever he had been about to say, he swallowed it. They moved him through the doorway, through the broken frame, through the hanging splinters, through the shattered glass that crunched one final time under the collective weight of 4 sets of feet. The night outside received him without ceremony, cool air, distant traffic, the pale wash of a streetlight on wet pavement. A black SUV sat at the curb with its engine idling, the kind of vehicle that is aggressively unremarkable, designed to be forgotten the moment it leaves your field of vision. The door of the SUV opened. Marcus went in. The door closed. The sound it made solid, well-engineered, the sound of a very good seal carried up through the open front door of the building and into Cindy's apartment with a finality that was almost architectural, like the closing of a chapter, like the sound of a lock engaging from the inside. The SUV pulled away from the curb with the same unhurried precision that had characterized everything about Bejum's operation from the beginning, and within seconds its taillights had turned a corner and ceased to exist. The street outside was empty. The night was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't precede something, the kind that follows it. Cindy became aware, gradually and then all at once, that she was alone in the room with Bejum. The awareness arrived the way awareness often does after extreme fear in pieces, the senses reconnecting one at a time, as the nervous system cautiously begins to accept that the immediate danger has passed and starts the slow, effortful work of reassembling normalcy. She heard the refrigerator hum. She felt the plaster of the wall against her shoulder blades, which were still pressed against it out of habit, out of the physical memory of the last 20 minutes. She felt the cold of the hardwood through her bare feet, and registered for the first time that somewhere during the break-in, she had curled her toes without noticing, and uncurled them now, slowly. She looked at Bejum. He had not moved toward her. He was standing where he had stood when he'd delivered his verdict to Marcus, a measured distance from the armchair, his hands at his sides, no glass now, no props. Nothing but the suit and the stillness, and the quality of attention that she was beginning to understand was simply how he occupied space, the way other people occupied space with energy or noise or restlessness. He occupied it with focus, with a kind of present-tense completeness that she had no framework for. "Miss Brown," he said. And then, reading something in her face with the same precision he seemed to read everything. "You're safe. You have been safe since before he came through that door. I want you to know that." Cindy's throat worked. "You were already here," she said. It came out steadier than she expected. I was. Before he broke in. Yes. She processed this. How did you get in? A small pause, the closest thing to discomfort she'd seen from him. Your building's superintendent was cooperative, he said, which was not quite an answer, and which both of them understood. And you were just sitting here, in the dark. I prefer to think of it as waiting, Beijum said. But yes, Cindy looked at the armchair. At the crystal glass still sitting on her side table, a small ring of condensation forming on the wood beneath it. At the paper Beijum had set there beside it. At her living room, the scattered books, the broken door, the glass she hadn't yet let herself look directly at, the imprint of everything that had happened in the last half hour pressed into the geometry of her own home like a hand pressed into wet cement. You didn't come here because of me, she said. It wasn't a question. Something in the architecture of the evening had been building toward this understanding since the moment Beijum had looked at the books on the floor, and she had enough intelligence and enough desperate, adrenaline-sharpened attention to have arrived at its outline on her own. Beijum regarded her steadily. No, he said. I didn't. Marcus hid something here. Yes. In one of my books. Yes. She looked at the scattered stacks, the toppled paperbacks, the spread-open novels and the cracked spines. Her books, which she had collected over years, from bookstores and markets and airport terminals and the back shelves of other people's apartments, which had been the one part of her domestic life that had always felt entirely and uncomplicatedly hers, and Marcus had used them, had reached into the one private geography she possessed and planted something toxic in it, the way a person buries waste in someone else's yard. She felt something move through her that was adjacent to anger but quieter, more settled. The kind of feeling that comes not from fresh injury but from the final confirmation of something you already knew the last, clarifying proof that your assessment of a person was correct, that the years you spent doubting your own judgment were the error, not the judgment itself. Which one? She asked. Beijum crossed the room unhurried, giving her space as he passed, stepping around the scattered books with careful attention and crouched beside the toppled stack near the sofa. He considered the books for a moment the way a librarian might consider a misfiled shelf. Then he reached into the pile and drew out a thick paperback, a novel, literary fiction, the kind with a spare cover design and a title in small type. He opened it to the middle with the confidence of a man who has had it described to him precisely, page 200. He pressed the spine open gently with 2 fingers, and the flash drive was there exactly where Marcus had placed it, small and black and utterly unremarkable, sitting in the hollow between the signatures of pages like a stone at the bottom of a stream. Beijum picked it up with the same 2 fingers, held it for a moment, and then closed the book. He set the book down on top of the stack, carefully, the way you set down something that belongs to someone. He stood. He looked at the drive in his hand, a moment of private accounting, a man confirming that what was lost has been found, that the ledger balances, that the 17 names inside this small piece of plastic are once again where they should be. Then he slipped it into his jacket's inner pocket and buttoned the flap over it with a single, neat motion. He turned to Cindy. I owe you an explanation, he said. And I owe you more than that. He reached into the other side of his jacket, the left interior pocket, the one that mirrored the one he'd produced the debt sheet from, and withdrew an envelope. It was thick. The paper was heavy and cream-colored, and had the quality of something that had been prepared in advance, which it had. He held it out to her, not crossing the remaining distance between them, but extending his arm, offering rather than delivering. Cindy looked at it. She didn't move. What is that? She said. Compensation, Beijum said. For the inconvenience, for the intrusion, for the fact that your home was used as a storage facility without your knowledge or consent, and that the resolution of that situation required you to spend 20 minutes pressed against your own wall in the middle of the night. He held the envelope steady. It won't fix the door tonight, but it will fix the door, and a number of other things. In the morning. Cindy looked at his face. She was trying to read it, trying to find the angle, the secondary motive, the fine print that turned the envelope into an obligation of its own. She was very good at looking for those things. Years of living with Marcus had made her good at it. She found nothing. Not because Beijum was concealing something, but because, And this was the part that took her another moment to absorb. There was genuinely nothing to find. This was not generosity in the warm sense. It was not kindness, exactly. It was accountability, expressed in the only currency that Bae-jum's world transacted in. He had entered her home, disrupted her night, used her apartment as the final act of a years-long collection process, and he was settling the account. It was that simple. It was that precise. She crossed the room and took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. She didn't open it, not yet. Not in front of him, but she could feel the weight of it in her hand, the specific density of a thing that represents a meaningful number of choices previously unavailable to her. "The man who brought this trouble into your home," Bae-jum said, "will not be returning. I want to be direct about that. Not as a threat, as a fact." He paused. "He has an appointment to keep. After he keeps it, the nature of his circumstances will be significantly different from what they are today. But that is between Marcus and the people he owes. It has nothing to do with you." Cindy nodded, slowly. She was still holding the envelope. "Your door," Bae-jum said, glancing at the broken frame. "I'd recommend you push the sofa against it tonight, just to close the gap. A carpenter should be your first call in the morning, not the second or third." He reached into his jacket one more time and produced a small white card, which he set on the side table beside his empty glass. "If you find anything else in your apartment that seems out of place, anything at all, you can reach me through that number. I don't anticipate it will be necessary, but it's available to you." He picked up the crystal glass. He considered it for a moment, then set it back down on the side table beside his card, a small, final punctuation mark, and walked back through her living room toward the broken door, stepping over the scattered books, moving through the cold blue light of the pre-dawn apartment with the same unhurried, contained authority with which he had occupied it all evening. At the threshold, he stopped. He looked back at her one last assessment, one final taking of inventory, the way a man checks a room before leaving it to make sure nothing important has been left behind. "Miss Brown," he said, "you struck me, in the brief time I've had to observe you, as a woman with considerably more capacity than the life you've been living would suggest. I hope you'll make use of that." A pause. The envelope should be sufficient to give it some room. He stepped through the doorway. His shoes made no sound on the landing. She heard the exterior door of the building open and close, and then there was nothing, no footsteps on the stairs, no voices, no engines starting on the street outside. Simply silence, filling the space where all of it had been, the way water fills a shape. Cindy stood in the middle of her living room for a long time. She didn't sleep. She pushed the sofa against the broken door the way Bae-jum had suggested. It took both hands and a braced foot against the coffee table to manage the angle, and when it was done, she stood back and looked at it, breathing hard from the effort, and felt something so ordinary and functional in the physical exertion that it almost made her laugh. Her body still working, still solving problems, still oriented toward the next thing. She sat on the floor among the scattered books with her back against the sofa and held the envelope in her lap, still unopened, for what might have been an hour. The apartment settled around her in the way apartments settle at night, small sounds of contraction, the occasional murmur of the building's infrastructure, a distant siren that rose and fell and disappeared. The cold blue light in the windows deepened, went briefly black, and then, so gradually that she couldn't locate the precise moment it began, started to change. She opened the envelope somewhere in that gradual change. She counted what was inside once, carefully, and then set it on the floor beside her and looked at it with a stillness that wasn't numbness or shock but something more structural, something that was recognizing, without fanfare, that the geometry of her situation had shifted, that the parameters she had been navigating, the tight, fear-shaped parameters of a life organized around an ongoing threat, had changed overnight, without her planning or arranging for them to change. That the morning now on its way toward her windows was arriving into a different set of conditions than the morning that had preceded it. She thought about Marcus. She let herself think about him completely, with the full, honest inventory of the thing, the years of it, the way fear had reorganized her habits and her posture and her expectations, the way she had learned to read his moods like weather, to adjust the temperature of every room she entered based on his presence in it. She let herself feel the weight of that. the long, accumulated weight of years spent making herself smaller. Then she let it go. Not quickly, not cleanly, not with any of the finality that the phrase implies in the moment of its use. But she set it down the way Bei Jum had set down his glass, the way he had set the book back on the pile, with the quiet deliberateness of a person putting something in its proper place so that their hands are free. She picked up one of the fallen books from the floor beside her, the literary novel, the one Bei Jum had opened and closed and set down carefully on top of the stack. She turned it over in her hands, felt its weight, opened it to a random page somewhere in the middle, and looked at the words there without reading them, just at the fact of them, the presence of them, the simple fidelity of a book to its own contents. She set it on the coffee table, upright, its spine unbroken. Picked up another, set it right, and another. She didn't stand, she was still sitting on the floor, still in her silk pajamas in the cold of the early morning, but she worked her way through the scattered books one by one, restoring each of them to upright, making a small, manageable order in the immediate radius of where she sat. It was not a dramatic gesture. It was not symbolic in a way she was consciously aware of. It was simply the next thing to do. The light in the windows was turning. The deep blue was warming, incrementally, through the spectrum from cold to gray, from gray toward something that was not quite gold but was building in that direction. The quality of the shadows in the room was changing. The broken door, with the sofa against it, let in a rectangle of air that was losing the smell of night and beginning to carry the smell of morning, cooler and cleaner, and carrying, very faintly, the distant evidence of a world that would be starting its day shortly, unaware of what had happened in this room, going about its business with the blameless indifference of all mornings toward all nights. Cindy gathered the broken glass. She found the broom in the kitchen closet where it had always been, and she swept carefully, methodically, working from the center of the doorway outward, collecting the shards into a pile with the patience of a person who understands that this is a task that requires attention and not speed. The glass rang faintly against the hardwood as it moved. Small, clear sounds in the quiet of the early morning, each one specific, each one the sound of something broken being gathered and accounted for. She swept it all into the dustpan. She emptied the dustpan into the kitchen trash. She stood the broom back in the closet and closed the closet door. She walked to the window. The sun was coming. Not arrived, not yet, but present in its coming, the way important things are sometimes present before they fully appear. The horizon over the buildings to the east had gone from gray to pale gold, to something approaching light, the kind of light that doesn't illuminate so much as announce, that says, not here I am, but here I come, giving you a moment to prepare for the fact of it. Cindy stood at the window and watched it come. She was still holding the broom handle, had carried it from the closet without thinking. A small, unheroic detail. She set it against the wall beside her, and crossed her arms across her chest, and looked out at the morning being built, piece by piece, at the edge of the sky. She thought about the card on the side table. She thought about the carpenter she would call when the hour was appropriate. She thought about the envelope on the coffee table and the modest, extraordinary weight of its contents, and the things that weight made possible the deposit on a different apartment in a different neighborhood. The courses she had been quietly looking at online for the past 6 months. The small list she kept in the Notes app on her phone of the things she would do when she had what she needed to do them, which she had always titled simply "when," in the faithful and stubborn belief that when was a real and arriving thing, rather than an indefinitely receding horizon. She thought about Marcus on his knees on her floor, and the look on his face in the final second before the door of the SUV closed, and the sound that door had made. And she thought with a clarity that surprised her with its lack of drama, its clean, unceremonious arrival, that she was not afraid of him anymore. That the fear, which had been structural for so long that she had stopped experiencing it as a specific emotion and had begun experiencing it simply as the background condition of her life, had somewhere in the last several hours lifted. Not because he couldn't hurt her, she was practical enough to understand that the world contains ongoing dangers and that practicality is the appropriate response to them, but because the thing that had made her afraid was not, had never really been, his physicality or his capacity for violence. It had been his certainty, his absolute, unwavering, performed certainty that she was his, that she was something he could return to, lay claim to, locate and correct and reclaim on any night he chose. That certainty was gone. She had watched it go. She had watched it leave her apartment in the back of a black SUV with its taillights disappearing around a corner, and she understood, with the specific and reliable understanding that comes from watching something happen rather than imagining it, that it was not coming back. The sun cleared the edge of the roofline across the street. The light came in through her window warm, direct, unambiguous, and fell across her living room floor, across the righted books, and the swept hardwood, and the empty armchair, and the sofa pushed against the broken door, and the small white card on the side table, and the envelope on the coffee table, and Cindy herself, standing at the window with her arms still crossed and her eyes open, watching the room be lit. She stood in it for a long time. Then she uncrossed her arms. She smoothed the front of her pajama top. She walked to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove, and stood listening to it begin to warm. And for the first time in longer than she could specifically name, the silence of her apartment held nothing in it that she needed to be afraid of. Just her. Just the morning. Just the quiet, radical, unremarkable fact of a new day arriving into a life that was, for the first time in years, entirely and unambiguously her own. Can Cindy Brown ever truly feel safe again? Or will the ghosts Marcus left behind follow her into the life she's finally free to build? And what does it mean when the man who saved you wasn't trying to save you at all? Subscribe and turn on notifications, because you do not want to miss what comes next. This story is only getting darker and more layered from here. Drop a comment. Do you think Cindy will ever cross paths with Bae Jum again? And if she does, will it be a blessing or the beginning of something far more dangerous? Like this video if this forbidden collision between an abuser's final night and a mafia boss's quiet justice had you on the edge of your seat. The next chapter is coming, and trust me, you are not ready for what Bae Jum left behind inside that envelope, or what it's going to cost Cindy to use it. See you in the next one, if Cindy's new dawn survives what's still hiding in the dark.